Disclaimer. The information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GAN's processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And welcome. Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to the North American team meeting. And I want to thank you all for coming around because it's been quite an eventful week. There's no question about it. And also, we are experiencing a lot of changes. And it's really hard to describe. But that doesn't mean we're not going to try. And as it is the North American team meeting, I must welcome all the other participants from all the other continents, because that's what makes this meeting so powerful. We are in the third place here, the Knowledge Seeker Workshop on Thursdays, the Brazilian community on Fridays, and the North American team on Sundays. And we try and put this whole puzzle together because we have over 6,000 hours of teaching, and we've only reached less than 14% of the population. So we have a lot of work to do. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute, teachings on plasma science. We're talking about intermediate transmission. The subject today is proximity. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is February 18th, 2024. This is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. Yes, so welcome, because this is a continuation of the intermediate teachings that we began several years ago. And what we're trying to do is to not only condense 6,000 hours of teaching and more, but also to understand that there are scientists and there are lay people, and we all need to be able to explain it in our own way. And so we're trying to bring things together so that you can do that. And so please feel free to cherry pick, take what you understand and apply it in your teachings, because people depend on you. And if you don't think that's true, then you wouldn't be here. And where are you? Where is your proximity? So we find that we're all from different nations, from different continents, and yet here we are within proximity. And why are we using such a fancy word? And so the thing is when I first heard about this, I couldn't understand why that is so important. I didn't understand the meaning. And then I really realized, despite any education and despite how many years of practice, words still have different meanings. And it doesn't help when social media distorts meanings. So it contributes to what we call our donkey hesitancy. because we always are seeking the lowest energy state. And why not? Water always seeks the lowest level. But the lowest energy state is actually very low. And not to say that it doesn't have any features. So, we like walking, but we find that rolling is faster. And jumping and flipping are a lot of fun. But life is hard. And so we say we have to get up on the horse. And what does that mean? Well, you see, the horse is walking faster than the man is walking. So either way, we're going step by step, or maybe we're going step by cycle. And then the question is how many steps and how many cycles? And it's kind of like saying, well, what are the ingredients of the cake? And what is the recipe of the cake? And so we could say, well, in order to make this cake, we need the ingredients in close proximity. And that, of course, would be within hand's reach, right? Because if you're making a cake on the kitchen table, you need to have these ingredients at hand. And then what do you do with these ingredients? Well, of course, you put them in a bowl and you mix them all up. And you do this as per recipe. And yet we find out, given the same recipe, given the same ingredients, and changing the person who prepares it somehow changes the cake. And of course, we try to mechanize this so that the cake tastes the same regardless of which country you're in. And we see this with fast food franchises as they distribute themselves around the world. And one of the bragging features, of course, is that a burger in North America tastes the same as a burger in Asia. Well, it's made by machines. And yet we can change the flavor of the cake and we can change the enjoyment of the cake. We have to take some things into consideration. So let's talk about proximity and what it actually means. So we are confused a little bit because we talked about it in the past about nearness. And so there's a nearness and then there's a closeness. So proximity has a special characteristic because it has a nearness in space, time, and relationships. Well, gee, isn't that what we're talking about? Space and time, how handy. So when we're talking about the proximity, we have to have a reference to distance. So maybe we can speak of something as being middle distant, distant, or far distant, or we can say that something is in close proximity, meaning that the amount of closeness is that it is, well, it's quite close. Also, in the proximity can mean in the area, but not quite close. So if you're baking that cake and it's more than arm's reach away, and you may skip that ingredient. But when we're looking at the universal order of creation of matters, we can't skip anything. And so this is outlined in book number 1 by Marin Tavakoli-Kesh, where we feature the universal order of the creation of matter. And as these things come together, we see the combination of matter, dark matter, and antimatter. And so this is the recipe, and these are the ingredients, and the Maghreb is the cake. But we have another cake. And so in book number 2, the structure of the light, is we have to understand that each of these ingredients in its own turn is a cake. And so when these cakes all come together, they form another cake. And there is a connection. And it's more than just the cake maker. And then, of course, once you have the cake, then you want to share the cake. And so, like a pie, we cut up the pie. And so in book number 3, we have the origin of the universe. And so what does that mean? Is that the beginning? Or is that the creation of the universe, which comes from the creation of matter? And so this requires deep thinking. And unfortunately, our language is not descriptive enough. And so we have gone on another direction with the transmutation preparation sessions. And we just completed the February 16th session. And that was the second one. The next one will be on March 29th. And then they will follow for a set of 6. And there's no guarantee that we will graduate. There's no guarantee that we will complete the transmutation, but there definitely will be a preparation. So we keep going with the one nation, one planet, one race for justice and world peace. After 313 weeks in a row, we timestamp our efforts and say, obviously, we're not there yet. And you wonder how many cooks are making the dinner. And we're searching for outer space. And are we really? We don't know how to search, and we don't know what outer space is. And we confuse space with outer space. Not the same thing. Because we've only achieved that little tiny perfect universe in the bottom right-hand corner, that little piece of pie in the sky. We call it man's universe. Totally ignoring the rest of the universe. And so as we're searching for outer space, trying to achieve that nearness and proximity to get to that plasma highway, to that pie in the sky, and beyond. There is a beyond. There is a beyond on this plasma highway, because that plasma highway goes to somewhere and comes from somewhere, and not only one where, more than one where. But we're not there. We're on the transmission highway. We're only discussing the transmission because it's part of the communication. And so when we're discussing the communication, we want to discuss the method of the communication. We're not even discussing who we're communicating with. So it's kind of like baking this pie, but we haven't discussed who we're going to feed. And so when we look at the universal embodiment, and we find that there are so many things that we don't understand, and you wonder why we're going into such detail, and especially now we're talking about the intermediate transmission. Why are we so worried about this terminology? And so when we look at how all of us have been taught, we see that the foundation of our knowledge has actually not been rock solid, as we've been led to believe. Because clearly, if we have this little piece of pie in the sky and we call this Earth, and thank you very much, I really enjoy being on Earth. However, it's only part of the rest of the what's going on. And so we can only go so fast on Earth. And then we see that the speed of light is the fastest transmission, because that's what we see. We see the rest of the universe. And if that is the fastest transmission, being the speed of light, we never question if that is true. But since the speed of light has a way of being measured, then if we measure things on Earth, we can do this, because most of the things we measure are smaller than we are. But what happens if it's bigger than you are? So clearly, if everything else is bigger than you are and everything else is going at the speed of light, then if you want to go at the speed of light, then you have to get bigger as well. And you need to be bigger if you want to measure this bigger thing. But even once you measure that, it doesn't answer the question, what is beyond? So somewhere, somehow, we found the creation of the universe. And how is this universe created? So we understand that it exists from energy. And since energy is always positive, then the charge reflects the motion. So as we said in book number 1, we started from the creation of matters. And then in book number 2, we had a connection. And in book number 3, we created multiple fields that we can connect to. And so we find that all these things work in combination. And so here we are discussing a very basic transmission on how we connect, because what we have is different points of view of what we call communication. So we think of communication as listening to someone talking, listening to the radio or watching TV. But what about this communication when we made the cups of life and we created this GANs? Like, where did that come from? Because nothing in this pie, none of the ingredients in this pie were GANs. None. And not even the person who made the cup of life contributed that GANs. Or did they? Because there was a person within proximity, and that person had an inner space that reflected an emotional strength. And as a result, the cups of life created this radiance manifestation of carbon dioxide GANs, calcium GANs, zinc GANs, copper GANs, water GANs, and amino acid GANs, which is only representative of some of the GANSes that we have, and was only representative of some of the GANSes that we are created from. And so the two primary GANSes that we had were zinc and copper, because the zinc represented our emotional construct and the copper represented our physical construct. And so that would have been one pairing in proximity to create something from something else that also had to be in proximity. And so we find that that was the amino acid, just to keep things simple. So the point of the matter is that to understand proximity, we have to understand the criteria of a relationship. And so it's from your point of view, so you can be very selective, and you can choose to include things, or you can choose to exclude things. And because you're very selective, it's always very subjective, because it's from your point of view, and your point of view could very easily be prejudiced. And why not? Because you're the one who knows the purpose of this reference. So there are many examples of this, and I will let you work on those examples. What we have to understand is that when we're understanding plasma dilution, we want to review page 154 of book number 1. At the inception of plasma, the antimatter components of the plasma were created by the stronger plasmatic magnetic fields. I guess the antimatter components were in the proximity of the plasmatic magnetic fields, would you say? So the future is plasmatic magnetical fields based through the production of controlled plasmatic dilution technology reactors. So these reactors would have to be in proximity. Well, what does that mean? How close is close? How far is far? And how big is large? And so when we look at the periodic table of elements, here's the problem. You see, my dear Watson, the elements are elementary, and life is much more complex. So when we look at the sum of the parts, they are greater than the sum of the parts. So it's a matter of more than just knowing the details versus the details of knowing. We have to take more into account, you see, because there's an inertia of plasma, and it's said to be due to the total collection of PM ticks of the constituent matters of atoms and molecules of an object, which are in fact interacting and attracted with each other, and any other matter or matters or magravs. So the principle of inertia is applicable to the dark matters and the antimatters, as well as the matter components of the plasma in the universe. Well, there's a pretty nebulous statement. And so the thing is, when we're looking at these periodic table of elements, we have to understand that they are the product. They are the product of a combination of field forces coming together. So in other words, these elements are the cake. And nowhere do you see the ingredients. Oh, sure. The periodic table of elements is the cake. And so, the carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, and hydrogen, these are all, the ingredients of the cake. And so you would be correct in saying that. And that would be within the range of what you understand. And so that range becomes very, very important, because when we're discussing this nearness and this proximity, because it affects the inertia, and the inertia is two fields interacting. And so if we are saying that the inertia of the periodic table of elements is based on the elements, but what we're not saying is what is the inertia of the elements, because we can't see that. So there is a nearness and proximity that is affecting the inertia of the elements. And is that the same proximity? And is that the same nearness that the elements are interacting with to create the inertia of the table of elements? Okay, so I know you just wanted that little piece of pie. Okay. Well, the terminology, as we've seen progress, and we understand that transmission is the x-axis and it represents rotation, and the transition is the y-axis, which represents polarity. But since we're discussing transmission, and transmission is part of that dimension, then a dimension has to have this interaction of the x-axis and the y-axis. And if that is part of the transmission, then both the x-axis and the y-axis are representative of a transmission. And so this is how two forces come together. And finally, we understand how the PM takes, when they come together, they create this dimension. And this dimension has an x-axis and a y-axis dimension. And as we've said, this is all energy in motion, and energy is always positive. So once we have this coming together of these energies, they become part of this field capture. And this field capture represents the x-axis transmission and the y-axis transmission, except to say that the x-axis is parallel to the ground and the y-axis is perpendicular to the ground, but it doesn't remain the same in its nature or character or conformity. So it also moves. And so if you look at the left picture and then you look at the right picture, and everything is the same, except that on the right picture, it seems to be more dense. And furthermore, the right picture is to the right of the left picture. So that's not the same position either, is it? So what is the difference in this position? And we discussed this at great length for the past few weeks, because we want to see this x-axis transmission, which is on the ground. But, we have to get this rotating field and put it perpendicular to the ground. And then we discussed that it rotates, and every rotation is a cycle, and that moves along the ground. And depending on the circumference of the cycle, tells you how far you go in one cycle. And then depending on the speed of the rotation, will tell you how far you can go. And so we've wondered how we move. And so we find that there has to be an input rotation that is perpendicular to the motion. So the output motion is aligned with the rotation. That is good, okay, because that way you won't have any screeching tires. And we find that if you get in the car, that car becomes the containment for your body. And so you can move along this x-axis dimension, provided there's an input motion. And then the other resolution that we came up to was that there is a change in the difference in position. And so as we move along, this rotation continues. And so we find that as each cycle moves, it moves to another position. But in between these positions, there has to be another cycle. And so it too moves between cycles. Is that enough detail? Well, maybe not. So maybe we need another cycle to move through this cycle. Is that enough? Well, it all depends on if the first cycle is ready to repeat its cycle. And so then we find this motion repeating, repeating, and repeating. And so you remain the same, the car remains the same, but there's a difference in position. As long as we have these cycles and they continue, and as long as the gaps are filled. So filled gaps and lots of cycles creates transmission. But how big is large? And so here comes a relationship with the cycles, because it's always a comparison of the diameter versus the circumference. And the answer is always pi. So it doesn't matter if it's a cycle of pedaling or the cycle of the wheels. And then if you have different diameter of wheels, so you find that even though you change the size of the wheel, the reference of the diameter versus the circumference is still pi. It doesn't change. Well, how can the diameter change and the circumference change and the cycles change and the distance change? Pi doesn't change. So the x-axis dimension of the circumference and the relationship of the y-axis dimension of the diameter is constant. So something is moving. So we find that the energy is always positive. So the positive and negative has nothing to do with the energy. It has everything to do with the motion. And so the motion is based on the negative charge giving and the positive charge taking. But if it gives to itself and takes from itself, then it's like a dog chasing its tail, isn't it? And we call that a binding energy. But if the negative is giving to another, and the positive is taking from another and not necessarily the same one, then the energy can be flowing. So we find that this duality, the energy can be flowing or binding. Okay, well, this is good. And as Herman Weyl described, there's no such thing as one and the same energy, which constitutes a charge at two adjacent increments of time. Well, why is that? Well, that is because there's movement. So if you have one energy and that energy changes its position, it can't be the same energy, because the cause of changing that position came from somewhere. And that, where it came from, had to have an element of proximity. And so this is the embodiment of the principles of flow and connection. So when we're looking at how we move, it can be more than just rolling. Maybe we're spinning. And so we have what the y-axis, we say, is based on polarity. But if it's spinning, it will be spinning around that pole. And if the x-axis is based on rolling, and that rolling is around a spindle or an axle, well, if it's spinning, then the axle is spinning also, isn't it? And so how do we go now as we're spinning along? And what is the difference in that position? Because clearly we can see, and we do this with sports because we play with balls, and we kick balls, and we throw balls, and we lob them, and all sorts of things. Play golf, play tennis. But in the rotating fields, in the rotating cycles, we have this measurement. And so there's this relationship of frequency and wavelength. And what is interesting is that the speed of light is constant. But the speed of light has colors. The colors of the speed of light are also constant. What changes is the wavelength and frequency. So as the relationship comes together, we find that the relationship of the wavelength to frequency is constant for all the colors. So depending if you're getting different sources, excuse me, depending on the nearness and proximity, you can change the color. One moment, please. So hopefully I've given you some time to read about Planck's constant, because it kind of limits the size of our universe, doesn't it? Because it's a universal constant and defines the quantum nature of energy. And so if we say the component of the light is a photon, and that photon has a frequency, so we understand that it'll also have a wavelength, and so we can measure its energy. And it always comes out to the same thing, but there's always a relationship. So we could say it has to do with joule seconds or meters per kilogram second units. A relationship, 2 dimensions, at least. So we have these dimension effects. So the x-axis transmission of the light is constant, but by changing the dimension effects, we can change the color of the light. Well, we can also change the dimension effects of the x-axis and the transmission of the colors of light. So if the frequency of the light is changed, then so will be the color. So the distance of this transmission has to be based on something. And of course, we wanted to base it on the length of the foot. And, you know, your foot and my foot are totally different. So we had to pick somebody's foot. So maybe we picked the king's foot. But that's not very scientific. And so we find that different people have different feet, and different feet have different bodies. And so these bodies are all unique. There's 8 billion of us. And these bodies are the containment for our soul. So the relationship of the transmission components for your soul and the interaction of these dimensions affects your body size. But the containment is constant, and your soul is constant. So it's the dimension effects that change. And so let's just review the plasma rules as we understand them, because these energy states can change by at least an order of magnitude, and we'll be talking that further in the weeks. But fundamentally, the higher energy state feeds a lower energy state. And so this is important to know, because we're still talking about transmission in the lowest energy state. And so energy state changes can manifest through natural creation or natural decay. Well, if we're going to go to the lowest energy state, then we are talking exclusively about natural decay. And if energy transfer is catalytic or non-consuming, then the only relationship we have to that is something that is stable. And right now, the most stable things in our world happen to be the Earth and the Sun. And so they also follow the rules in terms of energy transfer rates. And they do this by many orders of magnitude. But the most important thing to understand is that plasma can absorb these fields, and plasma is a barrier of fields. So proximity has a lot to do with it. So if we're talking about space, we have to identify, is that inner space or is that outer space? And since there's no such thing as ordinary space, because man has never been into outer space, with a rocket anyway, there's also Earth space or man space. And it's these two spaces which affect time. So when we say time, then it has to do with travel distance. That's very important to us. You know, how long is it going to take for you to drive to work? Well, I need to know how far I'm going and how fast I'm going, and I need to get there on time. But what happens if we're discussing an era? You know, and so we want to have a discussion about that era, and the things that we discuss have to have some kind of relationship to that era. And can we discuss that intelligently? So we all have to have some kind of proximity to our understanding of that era. And then, of course, we talk about this relationship. And so if it's the immediate relationship, it could be the family. But if it's generational, then it could be the genome. Or it could be the spectrum. And then, of course, when we look at the spectrum and we see that it's a reflection of the magnetical positioning, based on the gravitational field force of the sun and the gravitational field force of the earth interacting, creating inertia, which manifests itself in a spectrum, a physical color spectrum, a fingerprint. And in this case, it's hydrogen. And it's constant. So to understand basically these two dimensions, we can graph them. And so if we take these cycles and we find that one rotation of the cycle takes your position to the bottom of the next cycle, and continuation of that takes you back to the top, which is a repetition of the first cycle. So although it looks like we have 3 cycles here, 1, 2, 3, we find that the completion of the cycle involved the totality of these 3 positions, but not only. And so for those who are looking at the flat Earth theory, the problem when you look at the X and the Y dimension, and then you look at the flat Earth from its side, does not account for the hills and the valleys and the oceans below. And if you're hanging off the edge of the flat Earth, would you want to be hanging off a granite rock, or would you be wanting to hang off a puddle? And so as we're looking for the stairway to heaven, we find that where we are is based on our stability. And so our stability increases as we become more complex. And so I guess that's a good thing, because when we're looking at the periodic table of elements, we're obviously made of more than hydrogen, because that's the simplest element. And so depending on how we navigate through these 2 dimensions affects our susceptibility, doesn't it? You know, are we going to be low or are we going to be high? Are we going to be magnetical or are we going to be gravitational? Are we going to be on that stairway to heaven, or are we going to step beyond? And see, all of these discussions are within our proximity of understanding. So these dimensions have to do with transmission. So the x-axis is actually a transmission dimension, and the y-axis is a transmission dimension. And so depending on the interaction of these 2 transmissions, and we've seen that in the color charts, will affect the color, and we've seen it in the spectrum, will affect the identification of the element. And it will also affect the susceptibility. And so when we look at frequency, we can see that the frequency applies to the x-axis. And so the frequency may be regular or may be irregular, but sometimes it goes up and sometimes it goes down, and then that cycle repeats. And we can clearly see that it's not that uniform. And then, of course, there's another factor. What happens on the y-axis? So we see the y-axis dimension actually becomes amplitude, which means higher field strength, doesn't it? So yes, we can change the frequency and we can change the amplitude. And so this affects the transmission. The transmission in the physicality or beyond. So when we look at the stairway to heaven, we can see that the x-axis is based on frequency and the y-axis is based on amplitude. And so how we navigate through this not only affects our position, but it affects our susceptibility. And so as we continue, we find that really the frequency has to do with nearness, and the amplitude has to do with proximity. So in other words, if we increase the frequency, the nearness of the cycles increases. And if we increase the amplitude, then the proximity takes more into account. And so what you think is close proximity may actually have to take into account distant proximity. And this, of course, is going to affect susceptibility. And if at this point you're saying, well, I just still want that pie. I just want to know if it's a cherry pie or a blueberry pie or a cheesecake. You have to understand these concepts if you're going to enter into a scientific discussion, because there's this other anomaly. And if we see that the frequency represents the path link, then the amplitude and the proximity represents susceptibility. So the stairway cannot be susceptibility. So what is the stairway? Oh, there. The anomaly is resolved. The stairway is the inertia between the path link and susceptibility. So the relationship is constant within that dimension. And so we've seen this happen. We've seen a transmission freakout, didn't we? This was 2 Thursdays ago, when people found out that they could change their frequency and they could change their amplitude, and it both came together. Well, we call this panic. This is a picture of panic. And we haven't even really gone one step beyond. What happens there? What kind of freak out will we have if we go one step beyond? And if you remember the GANS freak out we had when we went from the nanocoding to the GANS is like a popcorn with a gas in the center. So you could say it's kind of like a GANS explosion. There's another kind of freak out. And this totally makes sense because we're full of GANS within our containment, the containment of our skin. And so we find that the containment within our skin is the inertia that comes from the magnetical x-axis and the gravitational y-axis. This becomes a transmission maggraph. Well, this is good. Now we have a maggraph. But how do we move? And so one of the ways, obviously, is to bind the energy, which we need to do by being self-serving. We need to do that as well. But we've chosen to do it at the expense of others, that this is a custom on this planet. And so when you understand that the energy binding and the self-serving attitude of the person that you're stealing from also needs to do energy binding and self-serving, he is now being robbed. So how does he fulfill his energy binding? So either he creates a barrier so that you can't steal, or he robs from someone else. Well, that would be the obvious solution because that would satisfy his proximity, wouldn't it? But can we draw that energy from another source? And so we find that this energy transmission is a two-way street. And so all we've discussed are the two dimensions, the x-axis dimension and the y-axis dimension, but we understand it's a two-way street. So, and also it can go in two directions. And we've already seen that we can do two different sizes. So not just in the one bicycle, but we can have another bicycle with two different dimensions. And that bicycle could be a different dimension from the first bicycle. And in fact, we can have one car bigger than another car. And so we see that we have two variables. These variables create something that is constant. We have an embodiment. So we have another transmission anomaly, yes, don't we? And we figured this out last week because how does the car from position 1 go to position 1A? And we discussed this because it has these cycles, which are based on frequency, times these cycles, and that equals time. And then if you take these frequency times the wavelength, that equals the distance. So there's a difference in this x-axis dimension to go from position 1 to position 1A. Still the same car. And so we see that the planet in many ways does the same thing. It rotates. That's the x-axis, and it rotates around its polarity. That's the y-axis. And it does this every day. And for 360 days and a little fudge bit every year. And very reliable. And it does this because it has this binding energy transmission where it absorbs in and more in through the force fields of attraction. And this contributes to its gravitational stability. Well, this is good. We want stability. So as we move along and we move along one cycle, in order to move along, we have to absorb this energy to facilitate this cycle change or this cyclical rotation. But the Earth is also contributing to its magnetical stability by elevating the energy transmission out. And then more is out. We call this emission, and it comes through the force fields of repulsion. And it contributes to the stability. So in order to move along, energy has to come in and energy has to go out and more energy has to come in. And so we succeed in moving from position 1 to position 1A, even though the embodiment of our body remains the same and the embodiment of the car remains the same. So the only difference is the position. Well, we could have a proximity anomaly because it doesn't necessarily mean next to. Because it could be a difference in position without a direct connection. So in this case, we've removed two of the cycles. How did we bridge these cycles? Because we're still having this time and distance difference in position from position 1 to 1A. So if we look at the rest of the universe and we see this overlapping proximity, so we know there's a sun space and a planet space and a moon space, and then that space in between, we call the in-between space. And each of these fields is contained. So what contains these fields? And so these fields have to do with proximity. So if the fields are overlapping, then the proximity is overlapping. Well, how do you judge proximity? How much is enough? How big is large? So let's just complicate things a little bit, because when you drive your car, you're not alone. You want to go from position 1 to position 1A, and someone else there wants to go from position 2, position 2A, and it just so happens to overlap the x-axis dimension on the ground that you are traveling on. And so you have an overlapping proximity, and both are doing a transmission. So what does this mean? It means that in addition to this two-way street, we also have 2 lanes at the very least. So this is the transmission proximity. So in other words, more than one transmission can travel on the same road. You can travel in 2 directions on the same road. You can have 2 different sizes on the same road. You can have 2 different embodiments on the same road. This is the transmission proximity. So when you're looking at the Earth space embodiment and you say, well, wait a second, man space is very undependable. We have too many variables. But Earth space is a common denominator, right? All of us here, all 8 billion of us here are on Earth space, and it's much more dependable. So we find that the cycles are maggrav dependent. We agreed on that. The frequency of the cycles are maggrav dependent. Okay, we agreed on that. And the containment is maggrav dependent. But this containment is based on nearness and proximity. And so we find that this containment is based on Gans binding, which requires an excessive input. And so we added this rotation. And in that process, we created an extreme offsetting to allow those plasma fields to be released. And we have a lot of stability, not only in our physicality, but in the plasma stability. We just all need to be fans of man and understand transmission, that the release of the binding energy precedes the retrieval of the beneficial energy. The field release precedes the field capture. The giving precedes the taking. The emission precedes the absorption. Being plasma dominant precedes being physical dominant. And our focus is on our dimensions. And so the conclusion is not man-space centric, it's probably Earth space centric. But there's another conclusion about the sun space dimension, and that's not conclusive. Because what we do know is that the containment is dimension centric. And so therefore the proximity of the containment is dimension centric as well. So there is matter plasma that is physical and a matter plasma that is plasmatic. So the plasmatic is feeding and the physical is a feedback of that dimension. And we remain feedback dominant. How can you be dominant in one dimension and be in balance. So we do have an ability to do proximity positioning. So when we have this one-track mental binding to this containment, that requires an excessive emotional input. But in order to create, we have to have an extreme offsetting so that we can release in cycles ideas, wishes, courage, and love from a containment without being consumed, without having to rob anyone. Because here we are in the post-November the 11th, 2023 era of choices, and we do have choices. Except if we want to stay in the Earth space, we have no choice but to recognize that there is an outer space and an inner space, and in order to get there, we can't rob from others. It behooves us to enhance others. And so this is how we achieve the greater oneness. And 525 knowledge seeker workshops in a row, we're trying to transcend the limitations of nuclear science by introducing the plasma science. And so the KAKT space plasma research teams are gathering together around the world to bring the KAKT Foundation Spaceship Institute teachings on plasma science and welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers. There's a World Peace Treaty. It's important for you to sign. It is your ticket to the universal community, because is man cornered in a two-dimensional universe, or can man find heaven through field transmission of vertical motion with the guidance of forward motion and perpendicular rotation? One thing is constant. We're constantly searching for the heartbeat frequency of truth. And the nearness and proximity of containment is foundational for transmission. We just have to learn what to take into account. And so the plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age. And this is the end of the lesson, end of the trip. Thank you so much for joining me.
All right. Thank you very much, Alex, for sharing your time, your knowledge, helping us to understand a little bit more. But I think I got lost in some of these words myself, which is not unusual since I'm still in the first class, let's say. But we can open it up to the participants if they'd like to raise a question, a comment, an objection, a clarification. And I'm sure Alex can handle that. Did that transmission come over, Alex?
Can't you hear it? The silence, isn't the silence deafening?
Yeah, yeah. You know, this, you come up with proximity positioning. Did you actually test this?
Yeah, well, yes, I did. But the thing is
Tell us how you could run a test on proximity positioning or any of the things you've talked about. That's going to be one of my new things, asking people, have you tested this? I hope that's not offensive.
No, it isn't. What I really wanted to say to precede the answer, if I may just give you a little bit of preamble, is that when I first heard about this, I thought it was kind of banal, very very basic, and I couldn't understand why those in the scientific community were concerned with nearness and proximity, but the problem is that when you bake your cake, that's all you look at. And yet, what you don't see, let's say, for instance, you're making a blueberry pie. Someone made those blueberries and they were not on the kitchen table. So we don't take that into account. And those blueberries grew in an environment and you don't see that. So you don't take that into an account. And those blueberries weren't necessarily what would you call native blueberries. They may have been artificially created in a greenhouse of a certain genome. And so we find that, like, for instance, I happen to live in one of the best blueberry areas in the world because our area is very polluted and blueberries can thrive in a polluted environment with an acidic soil. And, how do they do that? So when you compare the taste of those blueberries with the taste of blueberries, let's say they come out from another province, which are greenhouse grown, they just don't taste the same. And then, of course, if you try the blueberries that you get at the supermarket, and they're also different. So, we don't take all of that into account. So the quality of the ingredients has a lot to do with it, but that's not what's on the recipe. The only thing that's on the recipe is, if I'm making a blueberry pie, I'm getting these blueberries. And so we limit ourselves. And the moment we limit ourselves, then we say, okay, well, that's all I'm going to take into account. Well, that's not how science works. And this is very good, because if you were to let's say have an artificial human and it was factory produced and they were all the same, well, maybe the first one might get you excited, but then once the 100th one comes off the assembly line, oh, you'd be kind of bored. You'd say, well, that's the same thing. That's more of the same. So where does the spice of life come from? And so this comes from the nearness and proximity of things that have a relationship, and they transcend space and time. This is the key point. And so when I was introduced to this, and I say, oh, I never took that into account. I didn't know enough to take that into account, if you take my meaning there. So what does that mean then? Well, if you get a feeling and you say, oh, I'm thinking about something, or more in particular, thinking about someone, you haven't thought about that person maybe months or years. And 2 days later, that person shows up. Did you call them? Did they call you? You don't know. They show up unannounced. You thought about them 2 days ago. Did they think about you 2 days ago? And let's say, for argument's sake, that they did. Well, if they thought about you and you thought about them, that would put you in proximity, wouldn't it? And then how do you get the nearness? Because at that point in time, I have no idea where they are. I just thought of them. And where exactly was that place that I thought of them? What space was it in? He said, oh, I thought of it. Really? And what color was the room? And was the room square? Was it round? Or, were you in a plane or were you in a boat? And so, well, that doesn't matter. I just thought of them and they were there, but it obviously was overlapping your environment that you were in, right? Because you were already in physicality, and then suddenly you think about them. You haven't moved from your physicality, but your thought has moved. So now you have an idea, right? You have an idea of something coming, and you say, well, I don't know where this idea came from. I have no clue, but in the past, I would discount that. Okay. Well, I can't discount it anymore because it didn't just happen once. It happens frequently, and it happens more and more frequently. And so this is kind of it's become kind of fun. And if I pay attention to that and I say, hey, nothing is nothing. Something is always something. I had an idea, or I had this excessive emotional input. Fortunately, in the physicality, we have a delay in consequences. So if I felt the presence of this individual 2 days ago, that might be a good thing. Because had that presence manifested right away, it could have been embarrassing or it could have been inconvenient. So there was a field created, an idea or a wish. Hey, I want to go see so and so. That's a wish. Or, oh, I really, I missed the love of my life. Wouldn't it be nice if I could, see that person? And boom, a couple of days later, you see that person, you go, oh, wow, how did that happen? So, or, it could just be a simple thing like a phone call. And that would be a equal type of manifestation. The point of the matter is that there's a proximity positioning, and that we have to understand that and recognize that and use that as an asset. And if we do, then we can transcend the limitations of these dimensions and understand that this is part and parcel of transmission. And transmission is what we're talking about as part and parcel of communication. So when you say communication, well, courier can deliver a parcel. That's a form of communication. A cell phone can deliver a phone call. That's communication. The internet can bring on a website. That's a communication. Or you can walk to the grocery store and pick up a cake, and that's a communication. So all of this has to do with positioning. But what causes the manifestation of that position is based on the proximity, and then based on the nearness, because the two are not the same. This is why I've learned to really enjoy the English language, because where I had a real breakdown was when the rapper community decided to get sick. And I thought to myself, what happens if a person is really sick? Would you call the disc jockey or would you call the hospital? Anyway, we all have some decisions to make. And one of those decisions that we have to make is, where did we come from? We came from somewhere that had a proximity to where we are now. And where are we going? We have to have a proximity to where we are now. So we have to be a little bit more clear in how we define our position. How's that for a
Good answer.
general
I don't know
answer?
if I'm up to your understanding of it, but good answer. At least I felt it was good.
Well, this was happening to me a lot, and I owe this to the fact that, I have been on a lot of these monthly sessions, as have you. And, a lot of people come from there and say, oh, I didn't feel anything. Well, the one thing that everybody has felt in common is the nearness and proximity to peace and contentment and calmness. And so what does that mean? Well, the universe is peaceful and content. Earth space is not. So this becomes a noticeable feeling change. Now, if you are in the universal community and if you are peaceful, you will not feel any change. And wherever you go, you will go to some place that has this kind of proximity. And so you can enlist the proximity positioning parameters to go there. The Earth space is not going to be on your travel agenda because it's not very peaceful. So why did we come here? And I think we have to either state that we are either ludicrous, stupid, courageous, or determined. Or where are we? A, B, C, D, E, all of the above.
Or just wanted to have an experience in the matter state.
No, I disagree. This is not a show.
You're welcome to it. Okay, let's see if anyone else would like to raise a point. I see a mic has just come open.
Alex, how many pies were consumed during the building of these slides for this show?
Is that a
I've
trick
been doing this
question?
about 4 years.
They must be old blueberries for 4 years of pies. That's how many freezers full?
No. It only came one cycle at a time.
Only one cycle at a time. Well, that's
Yes.
pretty good because we're in some pretty wild cycles right now of understanding.
Well, you'd be proud of me. I missed last week. No pie last week.
No pie last week.
No.
Then there must have been a cake.
No, there were chips.
Oh, now we're diverting from the program.
I'm changing my position. Yeah.
Well, I'd like to thank you for an absolutely awesome teaching today because it opens up a lot of doors to understanding of just what is happening within our community. of understanding the energies and things that we are and that we are creating as we meet every week. And I'd like to also put out the fact that I think everybody should pay a nice big collective hug for Diane, because she deserves it for all the energy that she's put in to herself and to our circle. So Diane, I put you in my circle of support.
I'm in that circle as well.
Mm-hmm. Agree. You know, Alex, I thought of you yesterday, and it had to do with
I showed up today.
No, it had to do with hockey and Gretzky. I don't know if you're familiar with Gretzky.
Okay, I know what you're going to say. Tell me if I'm wrong.
Go ahead.
You saw a TV commercial.
No,
Oh, okay.
it was a quote. And actually, I thought it could be beneficial for all of us in the transmutation. Now, wasn't he a great scorer? Was that his claim to fame, or what was
Yes,
his?
it was.
Okay.
Yes, it was. And you know, in a roughhouse sport, he was very peaceful. So, you know, at some point in time, he figured it out. You can't score from the penalty box.
So here's the quote. Gretzky said, and I was thinking of this for transmutation: be where the puck is going, not where it is. Did he guide those pucks in a way in through his emotion? Many times you do some of these shots and you just can feel almost you've guided it in. So be where the puck is going, not where it is. Did he will a lot of those scores, perhaps? Obviously, he was one of the greatest players, but did he have some sort of secret advantage that he could use his emotion almost to guide that puck?
I would say yes. And furthermore, what was really good for him is that his teammates shared that emotion. So the exchange of energy was instantaneous, and then you don't have much time. You know, it's a very fast sport in a very small confined environment, and so you have to think very fast. And I have to tell you, uh, as a former soccer player, when you have players on your team that think that way, as per that quote, it is glorious. Oh my God, the feeling of satisfaction is so wonderful, because you know how you have to run all the time, and that's very energy consuming. But if you can run to a position and then have that ball delivered on your foot right in your sweet spot, and then you put it in into the net and accomplish your goal, and you know that you had to develop the skill to be able to receive that ball and kick it into the net, but you couldn't do it without the accompaniment of a teammate. I think that's that's one of the rewards that you get, you know, from playing. And the many games that you lose, you forget about that, because they don't compare to that beautiful goal. And you know, Gretzky's quote there brought to mind a situation that I had, you know, and we were playing in the amateur field, and I was playing with another player who had exactly that. And that's what I did. I ran into the position, and would you believe it, I had already lunged forward to the point where I was actually sliding on the ground. So I wasn't running into that, but I had already slid into that position. And with his awareness, he kicked the ball into my foot, and it just went right into the net. And a split second either way, and either a defenseman would have blocked it or a goalie would have stopped it. So it was absolutely perfect. So you don't even have to be a professional player. I never was a professional player, but just in a Sunday kick around and have this wonderful feeling of accomplishment by describing exactly the quote that you just said. And it is truly a wonderful thing. And that isn't just to do with sports. That has to do with a lot of things. And
I thought it related to transmutation. Don't focus on where you are, focus on where you're going. Put your emotions into that position rather than I'm here, I see the same furniture, I'm not going anywhere yet. Focus it on be where the puck is going, not where it is.
and that's all you have time to do, you see. So you've just spoken about something that I just wanted to mention, and that's exactly the same what we're doing through the Kesh Foundation. I mean, you have to do that. You have to be able to transcend those limitations and understand that there's more. There is a beyond, and we can't discuss the beyond because we don't qualify to get there. We have to elevate our thinking and understand that if our limitation is based on the fact that we're stealing from someone else, first of all, we're shortchanging ourselves because we're drawing from the weakest energy. And second of all, we're limiting ourselves because we don't qualify. Well, in order to understand that deficiency, we had to understand beyond nearness. We had to understand proximity. So there is a beyond. That proximity is the beyond. How do you get to the beyond? There has to be an affinity. There has to be some kind of connection. There has to be some kind of relationship. And it transcends space and time, you understand? Carry on, Mark.
Yeah, Erm just passed me a ball. Could I toss it to you
Yeah,
and
yeah.
see if you'd like to make a comment? Five-sided? Six-sided?
Yes. You're so funny. You're so funny. I wasn't going to talk about that this week.
Okay,
But
you were saving that for another class? Okay.
Well,
Fine.
yeah, but we can talk about that then as well. We can talk about it twice. So it's a relevant topic. You know what? I wish I had brought some extra slides because
We could take a look at the transcript, perhaps.
no. I had some slides, and I really wanted to show. I am prepared to answer your question, but okay. Do you remember one of my classes I was talking about the amino acids, and we looked at the codons and the basic structure of the amino acids and how they were hexagonal shape.
Were there
But
anticodons as well?
oh no, energy is always positive. So the codons were basically hexagonal, which represented the Magritte condition, which represented a symmetric stability. So the pentagon represents the sugar. And we found
which we would call the orange pieces here. Would we call
correct.
these the pentagon?
Yes. Pentagon and hexagon. So, and this is not a secret, as you can see, the main, military headquarters of the United States, that's what they call it. They don't call it the hexagon. So, what is the point of the pentagon? It's a sugar. And so if we were to bring in another concept, and that had to do with symmetry and asymmetry. So if we look at the hexagon, and can you enlarge this potato here? And I want to see if I can bring on some annotating.
Okay,
Stuff.
that's about as large as I can.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Pretty close.
Okay, where the annotation is, where's the annotation? They moved it again.
It should be on your black bar. One of them may say annotate. To the right of the new share, I'm not exactly how the
Right of the new share.
next to the new share, to the right of the new share, two
Yes.
icons, or it could be under more.
More? Okay, let me try more.
I'm not sure
What's under more?
where yours is, but normally it's in that black bar. Mine is 2 squares away from the new share green button.
I'm sorry. There it is.
Got
okay. I got it. 180 degrees from where I was looking. It's the way researchers research, right? They're not paid to find, they're just looking. Okay. So if we draw this line here, oh, look, I got the right color too, right? So the top half of this hexagon is symmetric to the bottom half of the hexagon, right? You agree?
Yeah, both pretty much equal.
The left half of this pentagon is symmetrical to the right half of this pentagon. You agree?
Obviously.
We're going to, let's change the color. Oh, this is good. Let's change the color just for giggles. Okay, so the left half of this hexagon, with the green line being the dividing line, is equal to the right half of the hexagon, is symmetrical. You agree?
Yeah, just by my observation, I would say yes.
Okay, so let's draw this line across the pentagon. Would you say that the top half is symmetrical to the bottom half?
No, now something seems off.
It's called asymmetric. If it's asymmetric, it means it has a tendency to go towards symmetric, symmetric being balanced. So this is the role that sugar plays. It's a form of energy, it's a form of containment, and because it's asymmetric, excuse me, because it's asymmetric, it is always giving and taking energy. And it always gives and takes energy to something that is stable. And a maggrav is stable. It's gravitationally stable. Does that make sense so far?
Please continue.
It's so non-committal. Oh, it's just something else. Now, what we're going to do is we are going to remove this line. So the angle remains as if all 5 lines were part of the pentagon. So now I'm going to ask, if we substitute the yellow line for a blue line and say, we said in the past, in reference to the yellow line, that the left side was symmetrical with the right side of the yellow line. Having removed one of the sides, can we say that the left side is still symmetrical with the right side?
I'm sure some could and some would say no.
Okay, so those who say it could what is the reference that they're referring to?
You'll have to ask them, Alex. I was thinking of just a folding over of it.
Right, right. But we have a problem here, don't we? We have a termination there and a termination there. And so what I'm going to tell you is that there is a movement. So that there is a movement here. Oh, what happened? That was supposed to be red. Hey, how come you don't work?
We haven't seen the red yet.
Oh.
You've picked something else or something.
Okay, I guess I have to.
Go back to your color
Oh,
palette.
I went to the wrong thing. Just a moment. I did something wrong here. So let's just do that. One more time. No, what is this? I didn't want. Oh, hello. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's do this. So let's do that, and let's do that, and let's do that. So this movement that is going around is having a problem because it can't complete the fifth side. So you would be correct in saying that the left side is symmetric with the right side. And I took out the blue line, right? I'm sorry. So here's the blue line. Well, now it's an arrow. Let me go back.
Right, it just looks like the vertical red arrows side is a bit longer than the blue squiggly line side.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. A+.
For what?
Well, you have now created out of a supposed symmetric form here, an asymmetric energy flow. So I'm going to take one more color, and I better do this before we run out of colors. I'm going to take this line, and I am going to draw it all the way. And so I'm going to say, if we take this hexagonal form and this pentagonal form, and we look at the left side and we look at the right side, and let's put this squiggly line and replace it with a red arrow again, we would agree that both the pentagonal shape and the hexagonal shape would be symmetric along this purple axis. So left of the purple axis would be symmetric to the right side of the purple axis. Right? You agree?
Well, I'd have to do some figuring, but yes, I'll go along with that.
Yeah, well, I'm taking the center point at the top of the pentagon.
Yep.
And drawing it all the way down to the center point on the bottom side of the hexagon.
Yeah, I see what you're aiming for.
Okay, so the left side is symmetric with the right side. And then when we come and take this blue squiggly line to remove this red arrow that completes the pentagon, it is no longer symmetric. It's asymmetric. And what is very interesting is that we are going to insert a field here. Okay. And that field is a hinge. And that hinge is pivoting on this purple axis here, which allows the pentagon to flip independently from the hexagon even though the two are attached. So what does that mean? That means the hexagon does not have to flip. It does not have to display its symmetric quality. But if the pentagon were to flip, then something would happen here, and that would be that the blue squiggly would now, oh, no, not that, sorry. The blue squiggly would be on the right-hand side. So,
I'm just having a hard time envisioning this, but I think I'm getting what you're
well,
delivering.
the pentagon had 5 sides. We removed one side, and it has 4 sides, but these 4 sides are not a square. They have the same angular relationship as the pentagon. So if we were to flip the pentagon from the left to the right, that blue squiggly would then become a purple squiggly. The point is that it's asymmetric. The point being, it acts like a key inside a lock. And the fact of the matter is that you could remove another line. And so if we were to say, take another red line out, right? Then what would happen is that, you know, if that flips over, then that's going to be on this side. So the 2 blues, if they flip over, are going to be in the position of the 2 purples. And we can continue with this. So what we're saying is 5 sides makes a pentagon. We remove one side, we have 4 sides left, still in the shape of the pentagon. We remove a second side, we have 3 sides left, still in the shape of a pentagon. We can remove a third side, and the remaining 2 sides will still be in the shape of have a angular difference as that of a pentagon. Every time you flip this from left to right, it would act like a key inside a lock. And the more sides you remove, the higher the susceptibility of energy transfer. However, the most efficient is when you just remove the one side, and that energy then goes to the hexagon and draws energy from another source to complete the pentagon. And then that repeats, and that repeats, and that repeats. And what you have is this constant feeding based on the Krebs cycle. But if you start to remove more and more sides of the sugar, then you start to get a higher and higher craving for sugar. And when you do that, you get into more of an anaerobic condition. And then you get this sugar tooth, sweet tooth, sugar dependency. And the Krebs cycle becomes weakened, and it starts to lead to poor health. So if you want to liken it to a hockey team, if you take 3 players and put them in the penalty box, and you've only got 2 players left to defend, you're going to get massacred. But if you're only shorthanded by 1, you can still play, and you can even still perform. But, you know, it's only going to be a short duration penalty, maybe only 2 minutes. And then the player comes out, the fifth player comes out, and you're whole again. And then you get another penalty, you're short again, and then another player comes out, you're whole again. And this repeats and repeats and repeats. This is how energy is transferred within the Krebs cycle. So if you look at the structure of the amino acids, 2 of which are hexagonal exclusively, and 2 of which are hexagonal with a sugar attachment. It's the rotation on the asymmetric point that causes the key lock and allows energy to flow or energy to be contained. So I hope I didn't confuse you too much. I learned this over 30 years ago when we overcame cancer. And I'm allowed to say that because that's my personal story.
Mhm. Can we check in with our participants? This is a little too sweet for my blood. But obviously a beautiful lesson if you understand it in the depths that Alex understands it.
Well, I wasn't prepared graphically to help you on this, but you know, I hope it's suitable. There's no comments coming from the cheap seats, eh?
They all have the jaw down. Uh,
Oh, this is great. Yeah.
Thank you, for providing this for all of us. I don't know if that's your own football or soccer ball. Does look like it has some wear and tear on it.
So there is one latent lesson in this whole thing, and I think you understand how we're always concerned with polar shifts. Would you concur with that?
Well, it's in the news, but nothing really happens.
Well, yeah, exactly, because this polar flipping is happening, I don't know,
Pretty regular.
260,000 times per second within our body. So, you know, we're constantly jumping and flipping.
But he said those hexagonal shapes are a key into the transmutation world. I think if I
Yeah,
brought
because
up
it's stable.
yeah, there's much more. Obviously, it goes much deeper. But again, we don't have to understand it to use it. This is the beauty of the new systems. Eventually, I think we will, once you get out on your own and you're untethered, so to speak, but that may be a while or even a generation ahead. I don't know. As he said,
Well,
it
what is important
takes
to understand is that on the periodic table of elements, carbon is 6.
right, but he was talking about creating the carbon 4, carbon 17, carbon 60, carbon 28, carbon 12, carbon 14, quite a lot to get under your belt there. Or maybe it's just as simple as blueberry pie.
Well, the way I can answer your question is this. I read in the books about the Krebs cycle, and none of them explained it this way. And it left me confused. And when I started to understand that the pentagon is a key in the lock and that it flips, then you know that on a key, the teeth are on the top and then the straight edge is on the bottom. Or you may have two sets of teeth, right? On the top and on the bottom. But the point of the matter is when you flip that key, that's how the key works inside the lock. So what is the difference in the plasma which absorbs a field or is a barrier to fields? There has to be a way to prevent that. So in the one hand, it absorbs the field. Then once that field is absorbed, that field is full. And so it closes. And it does that by flipping its polarity. So it goes from being a taker to being a giver. Once it becomes a giver, then it needs to be fulfilled. So it flips back to be a taker. So this giving and taking is a constant polar flipping.
Okay, let's open it up again to the participants. Is there any further comments, questions, clarifications needed?
Alex, question. Does every surface have the five-sided, what do you call it? Is it a octagonal?
The pentagon shape?
Pentagon shape, sorry.
Yep. No, I'm, again, this is, I know we've heard Mr. Kesh mention this. Go ahead, sorry.
Well, we have squares and we have triangles. So what is unique about the pentagon is that one would think, if I say to you, can you give me a structure that has four sides? Well, first of all, the most basic one would be a square. But then if I give you the option to say, well, a pentagon missing one side would have four sides.
What about a tetrahedron?
Well, exactly.
That has four sides, three faces we see, and, one on the bottom.
Yes, it does.
And that's our star formation.
Right. But the star formation is not symmetric.
Because Mr. Kesh mentioned that the pathway to transmutation in our body is where the location of the pentagon is.
Repeat that, where the location of the one?
Where the pentagon, is.
Yeah. He mentioned that if we look on our skin or some part of our body, there's a position where there's the location of this pentagon shape.
Is a key to the transmutation. Does that mean we just have to find it and press it like a button? I think there's a much deeper meaning, but I just thought I'd throw that in. I was looking at my skin under a magnifying glass and I really couldn't find the five-sided shape. Yeah.
Right.
But I think Ed said he saw it somewhere in a picture that was already done somewhere. You could see it under some sort of microscope. But yeah, he said this is the key, and all structures have it, not just man, apparently.
Yeah, that was my question. If all structures have it, so does that mean that shape is the glue to the structure? Because it looks like is a pathway to transmutation, like you said. So if all structures have that, it has to be the center point holding the structure or the shape.
So you have interchanged the word glue and pathway. So the line that's between the hexagon and the pentagon, that adjoining line, that would be the glue line. But the pathway between the pentagon in the physicality and the pentagon in the plasma reality is the pathway. And the reason for it is because energy comes and goes as the poles are constantly flipping. You're always asymmetric. 5 is an odd number. So if you're looking to balance out, you need another.
Yeah, he's just barely cracked the door open on this mystery as well.
Well, think about it in this way. If the pentagon adds 1, it'll be even. But if the pentagon subtracts 1, it'll still be even. But the subtraction of 1 is different from the addition of 1. And so that's the difference between creation and decay.
Interesting.
Well, I think you've got it, Ike. I think you've when you said pathway, so then the implication is it has to be a pathway from somewhere to somewhere. So now we're talking about book number 2, The Structure of Light.
Exciting times in ahead.
Oh, definitely. Or let me just add, if we want to fully understand this, we have to transcend the limitations of the speed of light. Right? Because what we're looking at is a 2-dimensional drawing on a screen here of a soccer ball. But, we have to understand that it's because of the relationship between the hexagon and the pentagon that we have a spherical shape. It would be impossible to have a spherical shape without that difference. And as the French say, vive la différence. Would you like me to clear the screen?
Not unless you want to. I mean, I can minimize this and bring up the transcript, but I don't know if we can see. Let me just see if we can sort of bring this over, or now then it changes the whole.
No, it's okay. We've covered the
Okay.
subject, and we can always review that.
Okay.
But I think
Yeah, there's obviously much more to delve into here.
okay, so fundamentally, in summary, take into account symmetric, asymmetric, pole flipping, odds and evens. And so we understand that there is always a direction of flow of energy and motion based on charge. So that's the summary. So I'll clear the screen and let you take over, okay, my friend?
Okay, I think we're about to wrap up here.
Thanks for the question, Herm. That
Yep.
was a beautiful question.
Mhm. Okay, and here's another beautiful memento for all of us. May you be proud of the work you do. May you be proud of the person you are, and may you be proud of the difference you make. Thank you all for joining us today and being part of this change. And apparently it's getting closer to the heart of the government, so to speak, as the Iranian government, the Chinese government, and the American government start into a first step in a process of collaboration in this research and bringing it out into the public. And this will lead to bringing down the barriers or the borders, I think Mr. Kesh indicated. And this is another part of this work. It's not exclusively research. It's coordination, collaboration, and cooperation among nation states, realizing, I think, if they all have very similar technology and are able to transmute, there is no reason for the borders. Although the governments will still apparently try to control this process, Mr. Kesh says, I don't see how it is possible they could. So thank you all for all the work you do and the person you are and the difference we're all making together in this structure called the Kesh Foundation.
One more comment, please.
Please.
This is a key, and this is a keychain.
Mm.
And as you can see that it doesn't have any teeth. It's very symmetric. So it's any door that is like this will be easily unlocked. And so I want to thank everybody for allowing us to continue and allowing me to continue with this presentation. And thank you very much for sitting here with me. And back to you, Mark, and thank you.
Okay, let's play the Keep Kesh Foundation Free for Humanity. Become a trial volunteer, then the final disclaimer, and the meeting will come to an end. Let's give the panelist participants any last thoughts or comments you would like to make. Jefferson says, thank you, Alex, Mark, and everyone. Very happy to see Diane with us. Thank you, Diane. We keep sending the best energy. Good night, day to all. Thank you, Jefferson, for your presence as well.